Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all our viewers, whatever part of New Zealand or the globe you are. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for allowing us to come into your screens on your laptops or on your phones, cell phones or tablets, whatever medium you're watching us today. It's Sunday, the 27th of March, and my name is Sunil Kaushal. I'm your host for Weekender on Sunday. It's been a very mixed week this week, both nationally in New Zealand as well as globally. We've had the border restrictions and new announcements coming out from the government, as well as internationally, we are seeing a lot of pressure being applied on Russia with the war on Ukraine, but it's also dominoes effect across the globe, including in New Zealand. With the inflation going up, the petrol prices have slightly come down, but they're not enough. The government or the Auckland Council's figures have come out of how much they have done on the petrol tax and how much hasn't been used. Talking about Auckland Council, today I'm joined by a mayoral candidate, hopeful, who has given us his time today. He's got another engagement after this, which was quite a big one. So we are very grateful to Leo Molloy, the Auckland mayoral candidate, who is joining us now, and we'll be talking to him about his vision, who he is, etc. Good evening, Leo. Welcome to the show.
Good evening, Sunil, and welcome. Thank you for having me. It's an honour to be on your show, and it's an honour to be able to speak to the Indian community. Very important part of our Auckland community, the Indian community, very productive, and a significant number of people I know that we're addressing. I think 150,000 in total across the city. So very important fundamental part of the productivity and small business of this city. And it's a voice that I want to hear. I want to listen to you, and I want to hear loud and clear what you expect of me.
Sure, Leo. People do ask, who is Leo? So who is Leo?
Well, I'm of humble stock. I'm of Irish Catholic extraction. So I was born to a very modest family on the west coast of the South Island. Dad was a returned soldier. Mum worked in a mine called the Roa mine, but Roa is near Blackball. A lot of people will be able to reference Blackball. That's where the New Zealand Labour Party started. So I'm of humble stock from the west coast of the South Island. I was involved in the horse industry as a jockey initially, and I decided I wanted to become a veterinarian at 25. So I went back to school and studied 7 years to become a veterinarian. And I worked in the small animal business for quite some time until by accident I stumbled into the hospitality sector. And I've been largely involved in hospitality for the last 30 years. But I've been resident in Auckland since about 1997, and I'm a very proud Aucklander. I love the city and I love the opportunities ahead. I don't like what we're seeing now in the city, but I think I can bring effective change to the city. So who is Leo Malloy? At the moment, Leo Malloy is a person who's a proud Aucklander, but disenchanted with the way the city has evolved, what it's evolved into, and someone who is determined to make some constructive changes.
So what made you jump into politics? I mean, given your vast background of hospitality, veterinarian, jockey,
it's a
paradigm shift for you.
It's a big shift, but it's a sense of despair. I use the metaphor because people like to think metaphorically, in my view. The metaphor is that if you're walking home alone at night and you see 6 people beating up one person, I'm always the guy who'll intervene. I never shy away from a contest or doing the right thing. And for some time now, I've looked at Auckland City, probably about maybe 5 or 6 years. I've watched it slowly degrading, and it's incremental, so it's hard to get a handle on the degree of the decay of the inner city. But what I have been watching happen is a city that's more and more divided on multiple fronts. I've seen ineffective leadership at the mayoral level. We've had back-to-back Labor anointed mayors, and it hasn't been effective. The super city model is okay. It can be applied a lot more meaningfully and forcefully than what it currently has been. But the reason I'm getting involved is because I want to make a difference. I'm happy to sacrifice 9 years of my life to make a difference for the city. But I would like to think that the city, well, I do know the city hasn't been well served in recent years, since about 2010. And I do know that we need an effective leader, a strong leader, and a leader who can take command and take charge and turn the city back into the great city that it should be.
You just mentioned that, back-to-back Labour anointed, etc. And you have been very vocal about the differentiation or the separation between centre and regions. So are you disgruntled with the influence that Wellington has in Auckland or any other city for that matter?
Okay, so you know the stats, but I'll just repeat them in general terms. So let's say we're 35% of the local of the country's population, and we're just under 40% of the GDP productivity. We should be a lot more, but that's another story. But my view is that we contribute significantly to Wellington by way of tax revenue, etc. And Wellington seems to be on the view that they think they know what's best for Auckland. I don't think they do know what's best for Auckland. It's a case of the tail wagging the dog. And currently the inner city here is being used as a dumping ground by Wellington for MIQ and for 501s and for people who need mental health wraparound services. Everybody gets dumped in the city, just dump, dump, dump. We're not a dumping ground. We're not an offal pit for the farm of New Zealand. And it's time we stood up to Wellington, which is full of corporates in suits and people who just like to go out and drink their lattes and live in a fantasy world. No, it's not like that in Auckland. Auckland is brutal. Auckland is it's a diverse city. It's made up of so many cultures. I think 100 different cultures, 150 different languages spoken in Auckland. And Wellington does not represent Auckland, and Wellington should not speak for Auckland, and Wellington should not be telling Auckland what to do. Auckland is potentially the powerhouse of New Zealand, and it should assert its authority and take charge, and that is what I intend to do.
Sure. You took a few of the points that I was going to ask you. I'm pretty sure you would have read the very good report. I think it's probably one of the best reports I've read done by Sir Peter Gluckman on Auckland, the 9 different things that he offers. One of the things that he talks about, obviously, is the contribution that Aucklanders make, and you made the point about it. And coming to hospitality, especially your background from hospitality, and you've made a point that it's become a dumping ground. The City Rail link, I want to know what your views are on that. If you are chosen as a mayor, what would you be doing with the City Rail link?
Well, the City Rail link is so far advanced now that we simply can't back it up. We have no choice. They tell me they're another $1 billion over budget, so we have to dip into our wallets now for another 500 million, and central government will have to front with 500 million. It's going to service less than 2% of the population. I don't quite see what it's going to achieve other than make Britomart a lot more efficient. But nonetheless, it's at a stage now, by courtesy of the fact Len Brown activated it, that we just simply can't back the truck up. So we might as well get it finished, stop interrupting the small business, activate it and see how it works. I have low expectations with it. I think it's been massively disruptive to the inner city. It's completely destroyed Albert Street. It's currently destroying Pitt Street, K Road. They're just systematically working their way through the city and eviscerating every street and small business along the way. But God, please help us. Just let's get it finished so we can get on with our life, get rid of the barricades, the streets that are blocked, and try and get some degree of normalcy back to see if we can reactivate the city.
So would you advocate for it to be finished within your term?
Oh, absolutely. It's just no excuse why it's dragged on as long as it has. We don't have the right attitude or mentality. We're not productive or industrious enough. Some sectors are, some sectors aren't. You've only got to look at, perhaps, for example, the different rates of people who get vaccinated. There are some people who just don't care too much, are happy to do things on very casual terms. If and when it happens, it happens. That's not my view to life. I'm a very motivated person. I have read an article in the paper by another political figure who said it's like he lives 4 lives in parallel because I'm so busy. But I am a busy person, but I'm a productive person. And this is one of the great things I love about the Indian community is you're very productive. And we're not seeing productivity here. We're seeing people who are looking for an excuse to put their tools down and people who are looking for an excuse to do nothing. And COVID aside, and I know COVID's quite a tricky beast because it's not an easy beast to wrestle with when you don't know what's happening, but we have had the opportunity to look at other countries around the world to be able to anticipate what COVID's going to do or not going to do to the way we live our lives, and we haven't responded, in my view, as well as we could have perhaps. But that we're very much in the twilight phase of the COVID pandemic, so let's park that up in the meantime and say let's all get back to work, let's start living our life again, let's reactivate the city, let's get that City Rail link finished, and I mean finished, and I mean yesterday, not tomorrow.
Sure. Leo, one of the things is the borders will open soon, hopefully, fingers crossed, and come October, hopefully, tourists will be coming into New Zealand, into Auckland. And if you are the mayor, how would you like to see the city change to accept them? Given that I think you were bidding or you were helping the America's Cup trying to come to New Zealand, and by the reports today, not sure if it's gone to Barcelona or not, but as a mayor, how would you ensure that the city becomes the world-class city?
Okay, there's a multitude of questions there, but I'll try and embrace them all one at a time. So the first one, the America's Cup. I understand the figure they were looking for was 70 million euros, and I think it's gone to Spain. They will announce that on Thursday, but the America's Cup has gone. Should we afford harder to keep it here? Arguably so. I mean, you know, it's a kickstarter to get the local tourism industry going again, along with cruise liners, etc. I understand the opposing point of view, which is why should the city or the country be so viaduct-centric? I get that as well. But nonetheless, we're looking for big opportunities. And when you refer to the Gluckman report, this is exactly the sort of opportunity that Peter Gluckman, and by the way, I've read all 91 pages and I've read it multiple times, and I've screenshot about 15 different pages of it that I think are critically important. I'm a huge fan of the Gluckman report. As for kickstarting the city again, where do you begin? Honestly, where do you begin? At the moment, we've had the heart torn out of the inner city. We have to give people confidence back. You have to presume that you're a tourist who's getting off a cruise liner who've come in from some exotic location, and you're looking at the shop window of New Zealand. At the moment, the shop window of New Zealand is very, very messy. It's very toxic, it's disorganised, it's chaotic, and there's a very good chance that if you were to wander up Queen Street into Fort Street after dark, you're going to be the victim of extreme violence. That is not how a sophisticated first world city should look, and it's not how it will look under my watch.
Sure. I want to address the last question, reply that you've got about the inner city at night. A couple of years ago, I think Phil Goff did a survey with the Auckland Council around homelessness in Auckland. We are great at doing surveys, we are great at publishing reports, we are great at doing various things, but we don't see action. And you talk to, I know of people owning bars there, owning properties there, and it's people don't like to go to the city. And I know you've been quoted in the paper, you know, about homelessness, etc. And we do have a question from Richard. What are your plans for homelessness in the city, as I feel unsafe to walk?
Okay, let me ask you now, have we got an hour? Because this answer could take quite some time. How long do we have, just out of curiosity? Have we got half an hour or an hour?
Yes, half an hour.
Okay, so homelessness, I have a solution. There's a model, a Scandinavian country, Finland, have a model, which I will describe as the Finnish model. And that model does work. Measured across the entire EU, Finland is the only country that has a model that works to solve the issues of homelessness. First of all, though, let me give you some clarity on a matter that was reported in the paper. HQ headquarters, my business, is owned by me and me entirely. We have fed during lockdown 45,000 people. We feed first responders, we feed people who are at the front line of the Whanora Commissioning Agency, we feed the homeless through Grace Foundation. We've even fed Waitemata Health Board 260 people on 2 consecutive days because they were desperate for food. I've always been there for people who've fallen through the cracks, and I've always been there for the vulnerable. So make no mistake, despite the mischief of the Herald, despite their mischief, I am socially liberal but fiscally responsible, and I will always act in the interests of the most vulnerable members of society. Now, getting back to your question from the viewer, how would I deal with the homeless? It's not a particularly complicated situation. We need more homes, that is clear. What we don't need is short-term solutions like hostels and motels. If you put a person who's fallen on hard times, it could be mental health, it could be addiction, could be alcohol, drugs, could be a familial breakdown, or they could be a 501 sent back from Australia, torn away from their family. If you put them in a cheap and nasty motel or a cheap and nasty hostel, without a warm bed over a warm ceiling over their head, a warm roof over their head, or a warm bed, what are they going to reasonably do? If you show people no hope, if you paint a picture with no blue sky, they will invariably behave in a certain way, and it normally involves hopelessness, the devaluation of their life, their lack of self-esteem. And when you get into that predicament, you no longer have consideration or respect for other people's self-esteem and other people's rights, and you behave badly. So the key to it is to use that Finland model I described earlier, the Finnish model, and you then give people a roof over their head as stage 2. You recognise the people who need wraparound, you give them a roof over their head. Now, we commonly know this as community housing. And there's a number of agencies that work in the community housing space, some with government support, some without. The ones who are involved with the government are commonly referred to as CHIPs, but there's a number of private individuals too, like Brendan and Joe Lindsay, for example, or perhaps the Manson Foundation, who work. They've just built a beautiful new complex out at Gleneden Railway Station. And the key to community housing is you've got to be able to underwrite the part of any development that's going to be community housing. So the example I quite often, I like using examples, it gives people clarity. Let's say Avondale Racecourse was rezoned tomorrow. Let's just say, this is a hypothetical situation, but let's say, and say it had capacity for 3,000 houses. You would grant consents there on the basis that they make, or Avondale is turned into something that's modern, relevant and fit for purpose. And that may well include 10% community housing, so 300 houses, which will be spread right across the whole development. Now, that's a development there that's probably worth a minimum 150, 200 million, but almost certainly a damn sight more, but I'm just rounding figures up for the sake of a conversation. So when you say to people, I want to have 300 of your 3,000 houses, you've got to in turn underwrite or guarantee long-term leases there, which unfortunately the Kaingaroa won't do. So central government won't do it. They want a 90-day out clause. Local government won't do it, but it's only a stroke of a pen to say to a developer, if you're prepared to spend 200, 300 million, we will guarantee on 10% of those houses a 25-year long-term lease, which the government will then pay 150% of the rental for, so we have to provide wraparound and support services. It's only a stroke of the pen. There is no cost to the ratepayer, and that's how you do it. You grow little communities and you spread the homeless out. You give them a roof over their head on a 25-year lease guaranteed by the council, but once you give them a roof over their head, you give them some hope. You give them something that they own or they will eventually own after a 25-year lease period. It's not that difficult to do. It just takes a wee bit of courage and a signature on a document. And once you put the signature on the document, lenders will fund the developments. When lenders fund the developments, developer builds his 3,000 houses, and he in turn sells it on to the likes of KiwiSaver or some investor who will buy these things on a very low yield, a good long-term opportunity, provided you have guarantees in place, guarantees on the lease, guarantees on the rent. It's as simple as that. But this local government won't do it, and central government won't do it. And nobody can give you a reasonable, rational explanation why.
You've just mentioned very good concepts out there. You as a mayor, would you enforce your concepts?
Can you say that one more time? It's just a little bit quiet.
Sure. You've described a very good solution. Tomorrow, if you are the mayor, would you back for Auckland with central government on this?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a mayor for all of Auckland. The beautiful thing about my position is that I'm not aligned to any political party. And I know you come from a Labour background, and I'm not saying I'm for Labour, against Labour, because I'm very socially liberal, nor am I for or against the other side of the political equation. But I traverse the entire spectrum, and I will act for all of Auckland. I am not central city centric. I'm not viaduct centric. I intend, when you reactivate the beating heart of a city, you normally start with the CBD and then it expands out. But if Auckland is strong because the CBD is strong and reinvigorated, Auckland City becomes strong. When Auckland City becomes strong, New Zealand becomes strong. It's not a particularly difficult model. So would I go into bat against central government? You know I would. They're already reaching out to me. Everybody is polling. They're all seeing the inevitable. And the inevitable is that I'm going to be the mayor in a landslide. So Labor's already reaching out saying, describe to us the terms and conditions under which you will work with us and negotiate with us. My view is I am fiercely and strongly independent. I am relentlessly for Auckland, relentlessly, unequivocally. I will never waver. I want what is best for Auckland. If Auckland is 40% of the GDP, and under me it will grow considerably, it'll be more than 50% of the GDP because I'm so pro small business and productivity. I want to have every single cent that Auckland earns and sent into Wellington. I want it back here working for Auckland. I do not want Wellington, people in suits deciding what we should and shouldn't be doing with our hard-earned money and the rates that we pay, the GST we pay, the taxes we pay, the regional fuel tax. It is not their prerogative to decide how to spend our money. It is our prerogative. And I want it spent for the city, on behalf of the city, to make the city a better place. And I mean the entire city, every single square inch of the city.
Sure. Stephen from Birkenhead is asking, are you in favor of cycleways on the bridge?
I will never waste $800 million of anybody's money, nor am I in favour of light rail to the airport. There is no business model to sustain either of those. Cycleways cannot be and, they've got to be or. You cannot retrofit a cycleway to an existing carriageway, but what we can do, we can look to the future and we can say cycling and walking pedestrians may well be a very important part of our future. It's highly likely. So let's make provision for them as we plan going forward. But retrofitting onto a bridge, bizarre. $800 million, seriously? If I had $800 million to spend, I absolutely wouldn't be spending it for an elite minority who want to wear latex and ride bikes over a bridge on the weekend. It is absurd. It is no different to saying that just because you swim, you should have a swimming pool on your street corner. It is bizarre, it is absurd, and it's typical, it is very typical of the elite. The elite, the white snobbish elite who think they know what's best and they just look after the same little suburbs. It's Westmere, it's Point Chev, it's Grey Lynn, always the same resources going into the same suburbs. No one cares about Mangere East, no one cares about Papakura, no one cares about, name a suburb. There's about 10 or 15 suburbs that have been neglected in favour of people, Councillor Pippa Coombs from Waitemata, who thinks that they seem to think or be of the view that they know best what's for you and where to spend assets. And just while I'm on the subject, it's actually winding me up a wee bit. Can I say one thing?
Okay.
When they just opened a 2.5 kilometre cycleway, and they spent $14 million a kilometre on it, and no one is known to be using that cycleway. I cannot see any case that can justify or substantiate spending $14 million a kilometre on a cycleway between Point Chev and Westmere. If you can find a case for that, good luck.
Sure. Now, Leo, here's a point. There's so many controlled organizations like, AT and, Pinnacle Development, etc. This, and obviously there are different laws governing them, but, they come under the council, but they do their own things. For example, Auckland Transport, they just make a rule for themselves. And, there's hardly any consultation or a few consultation, and they'll say, we have consulted. You as a mayor, would you look at bringing them together into some sort of a thing where they just don't go and do things themselves?
Yeah, well, you have political representation at the executive level, which is not happening now. They're detached. But there's 4 CCOs left, as you know. There was 7. And we have the capacity or ability to do away with whichever ones we wish. I personally am of the view that Watercare should be a standalone. It's a very good business. It was well run. It's highly profitable, has hardly any debt, got a very good balance sheet.
Yeah. Auckland
Transport arguably should be independent too, but have political representation and probably should be chaired by the mayor, which happens in London, and which I'm thinking about doing. I'm thinking about chairing Auckland Transport myself until I get them back on track and focusing on the core values. The other 2 you probably could do away with. I don't really understand where Eke Panuku sits in terms of independent business model. I can't see any necessity for them. The assets they own very much should be at the disposal of the ratepayer, should be used constructively for. There shouldn't be any goings on behind the scene like there is with Eke Panuku. And really, they've failed the city anyway. If you look around the Eastern Viaduct, across Hobson Wharf, Queen's Wharf, etc., they've managed to do absolutely nothing with no return on investment. Auckland Ports is a different animal again, not strictly speaking a CCO, but worthy of attention. The other one I haven't mentioned is Auckland Unlimited. Now, Auckland Unlimited commissioned the Gluckman report, which you've just referred to, and I think it's an outstanding report. But Auckland Unlimited have done really virtually nothing for more than a couple of years now. They paid Rod Stewart $1 million to stand on a barge on the Thames in London and sing Sailing, which is bizarre. I could have got it from the internet for $1.99, but they choose to do that. But they've done nothing else. So I think Auckland Unlimited should go. I'm a perfect mayor for the space that Auckland Unlimited occupies. I mean, I'm very driven by events. I'm driven by community. I'm driven by resources like Stadia, Parks, Western Springs. And I could probably do that job on my own, which would save about, I'm going to guess, make a figure up here and say $200 million a year in salaries. But it's not a big job, Auckland Unlimited. And they definitely should be disbanded the first day that I go into office, or they should be put on notice that they're going to be disbanded, because they have no constructive function and no constructive role in our Auckland city.
Sure. Coming to, I know you've got an event after this, a big event, and all the best for that. But a couple of things. Obviously, the Auckland plan, the budget has come out, and I'm sure you would have read it. One of the things around that is priority is climate change. Where do you stand in your policy as a mayor for climate change for Auckland?
You do ask some big questions. Now, climate change is incredibly complicated and tricky.
I'm specific to Auckland.
Yeah, specific to Auckland, well, we have a targeted tax now for climate change, but it's also in the budget, so they're double dipping there for a start. Let's make that clear. But if you said to me that you wanted to have a climate charge targeted rate, targeted tax, and you were going to use it, for example, for preventative flooding in, say, the Kumeu floodplain, which is very vulnerable, in case you didn't know, Kumeu River draining into the Kaipara Harbour, I would probably say, yeah, I understand that. We should perhaps plan to avert a crisis of any significant magnitude like that. But climate change, for the sake of climate change, it's virtue signalling to a large extent, purely because China is currently, they're mining, I think, 350 million tonnes a month, and their increased capacity this year is 10%, so another 300 million tonnes of coal a month. We're importing 1.5 million tonnes of coal to Huntly. It's dirty Indonesian coal. So how do you reconcile the two? My view is that a lot of climate change, Prime Minister Modi of India, still, despite COP26, he said he's going to continue to use more and more coal. I don't think we can single-handedly turn a global crisis around. So my view is that we shouldn't be virtue signalling, we shouldn't be generalising, we shouldn't be doing trendy things, we should be focusing on individual issues. And I've mentioned one there at Kumeu, which is, I'm putting this on the record as often as I can, because potentially Kumeu could be devastated sooner rather than later by a one-off storm. If that floodplain doesn't drain properly, and at the moment it doesn't appear that it is draining properly, and we're increasing, well, I was going to say occupation, it's not the quite word, not quite the right word. We're increasing residential subdivision out there enormously. We don't have the infrastructure in place for public transport, and we certainly don't have the infrastructure to avert economic or climatic disasters out there. So my view would be that if you're going to do it, target it, be really specific about it, and make sure you use that money well, use it once, use it well, avert a crisis. Do no airy-fairy virtual signalling, none.
Yeah, I mean, I know the couple who lost their, or whose restaurant was flooded in those floods, and also in Henderson. I think in Henderson Valley we've had the floods come last year, and it was quite bad out there, but nothing has been done. Now, coming on to transportation, I think transportation is a big issue for Aucklanders. And I'm, what's your position around intensifying transportation in Auckland?
Intensifying transportation?
Yes.
I would like to think we would do the opposite. So we have a plan. There's about 300 million left over from the regional fuel tax, which is currently unspent. Yes. One of my key negotiating points with any central government was I want that money back for Auckland. And what I would do, I'm very keen to invest in hydrogen technology. I like hydrolysis, so green hydrogen for ferries, trains, buses. So if we were to, for example, have all vehicles converted to hydrogen, and the technologies are converting, it's very doable. Hydrolysis is marvellous science, if anybody out there wants to read about green hydrogen hydrolysis. So we have the capacity to convert to hydrogen. Simultaneously, if we ran a 1-year trial for free public transport, which is very doable, Christchurch did it, cost 37 million. Dunedin did a version of it where they charge $2 maximum. We can run entirely free public transport with $50 million set aside for operational administrative costs, but 200 million in lieu of fares. In 1 year, we could measure the critical KPIs. So we could measure congestion, we can measure emissions, and we can measure the number of people who use public transport, and we change the mode slightly. So instead of going with 50-seater buses, which is the standard fare these days, we increase the feeder routes, what I would call Venus routes, to the arterial routes. So let's say for north of the bridge, you'd increase services to places like Browns Bay with 12 and 15 seaters. Then you increase the frequency. So over 1 year, what you do is you're inducing a societal or a cultural change. You're teaching people that public transport is available more often. It goes for a longer extended period. You make it free all times, 24 hours a day for students, for example, targeted groups. That after 1 year, you would have a fairly good grasp on exactly what the value of free public transport would be to Auckland society. Would it relieve congestion? Would it relieve emissions? Would it increase productivity? These are the key KPIs. But we have to have a trial to measure it. We cannot hypothesize and do something at huge expense and then have no way of measuring it retrospectively. So that's my plan. Take the RFT, the regional fuel tax, take the $300 million that was supposed to be spent on Auckland but hasn't been, use it for a 1 year free public transport trial. And in case you're wondering, the average public transport cost for families around the south side of town is $40 to $70 a week. So what you're effectively saying, let's call it $70 and round it up. You're saying that you're giving people, if they wish, another $3,000 per annum rebate by way of free public transport. Is that good for the city? I would have thought there is no downside to that argument. That is a very compelling case and a great model. And once they've conducted a 1 year trial, then we can measure the merit and the worth of it and make an informed decision how we go forward.
Yes. Well, thanks very much for that elaborate answer. You've answered a couple of questions that I was going to ask you around the feeder buses and, empty buses running their routes, wasting public money. But thanks very much for answering that. Now, I know we are running short of time, but just quickly, just one more around housing. What's your vision for Auckland housing?
Well, housing, I did touch on that before, and I see the question has popped up again. So community housing, I'm a big supporter of. We have to accept that in a modern, first world civilised society, we have to provide community housing for people where housing is out of reach. Clearly, there are some other opportunities, expanding the city boundary. It's hard to know, rezoning could possibly work. You could free up some land. You could perhaps penalise people who are land banking, who are not activating their land. You could switch your rating system from a CV to maybe a land-based value. There's a lot of things you could do to incentivise housing. But one thing I would like to make absolutely clear that I'm not a fan of is the recent agreement, a handshake agreement between National and Labour, which allows you to build 3 stories in heavily populated areas without resource consent, 3-storey monstrosities and terrace type housing. To me, that is an erosion of the basic inherent values of some of our better suburbs. And I'm talking typically about Belmont Beach, that is, of course, Cheltenham Beach, just thinking on my feet here, Devonport, Northcote, right through to St Heliers, Mission Bay, Grey Lynn, Remuera, beautiful old villas being torn apart and having these there's one in Ventnor Road in Remuera at the moment, a very good example. 13 houses built on one section with no all-street parking. Now, that's not right. There's no point in eroding the value of everybody else's precious assets just by piling little clusters of houses on. There are some good models. I told you before about the Ted Manson model at Dunedin. That's a very good model. I love the Manson family's work. Their trust work is fantastic. The boys from Sleepyhead, the Turner boys, they've done a great job down at Tahuna, which, as you know, is down closer to Huntley, but they've done a great job building an entire village there. There are other villages we could look at like Pocono, but there's the whole belt heading up to Kumeo. I touched on it before. That's an opportunity up there to expand the city into the Rodney district. Up Kumeo Way is significant. You could look south and you can go from Clark's Beach, you can traverse right across State Highway 1 over into places like Clevedon, which would be a fantastic opportunity. There's a lot of land there through Ardmore, Drury, those sort of places. But you have to have a model that works. You can't just go subdividing hundreds and hundreds of acres and putting great groups of houses on if you don't have your water treatment systems, et cetera, in place, and walkways, green belts, community-based options and activities. We have to have a big picture vision for expanding the city. But it doesn't, in my view, involve putting 13 houses on one section in the middle of Remuera. That's a no-go zone. So we have, but once again, what we lack here, Sunil, we lack leadership. If we had leadership and we had a plan, as per the Gluckman report, we can expand the city and make it into something absolutely outstanding. This is the shop window of New Zealand, and it's on the Pacific Rim, along with those great cities on the Pacific Rim, like Sydney, Brisbane, think of another city, San Francisco, Vancouver. They're great cities and they deserve greatness. And at the moment, we have a great environment, we have a great geographical location, but we have appalling leadership and we have no vision.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time today. But before going, just if you can wrap it up for me, why should someone vote for Leo Molloy?
Well, the reason you'll vote for me is because I'm non-aligned and I will make a difference. I'm not politically aligned. I don't have any allegiance to Labour or to National or to anyone else. I can rattle the cage and I will rattle the cage. I can lead and I will lead. And I know and I understand the value of all the different little communities of Auckland. And the Indian community, I don't care whether it's across the medical sector, pharmaceuticals, financial services, small business, you name it. The Indian community is a significant part of our Auckland city and it's a significant part of our growth. You have to vote for me. Don't just vote for Leo. Tell your friends, tell your business colleagues, tell your employees. We need 120,000 votes to win this. We're already polling. We're sitting on 100,000, but I need you and I need you badly. I will deliver. You just have to invest your trust and faith in me and I will deliver. And I will deliver because I care. I'm giving this city 9 years of my life. I'm 66 today. I'm not a young man anymore. And I realize that, I don't have forever to live, but I am determined, absolutely determined to leave this city a better city than the city that I arrived in 1997. So all I'm saying to you and to the people out there, if you're disenchanted, embrace the opportunity. If you're not disenchanted, you should be. You're not reading the paper. You're not reading the pulse of the room. This is a city in trouble. It has been torn from limb to limb. As Professor Gluckman said, it has been hollowed out. The core has gone. The beating heart has gone out of the city, and we have an obligation, a moral duty, to give it a beating heart back and to turn it back into a great, great city.
Thank you so much for your time, Leo Molloy, the Auckland mayoral candidate today. Wish you all the best and also for the event this evening. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope to speak to you again soon on your campaign.
And thank you so much for the opportunity. I reiterate one more time, I'm a huge fan of the Indian community, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to reach out and speak to you. So please, let's agree to do it again. I'm available anytime, and I'm always happy to discuss ideas, and I'm happy to take input. It's not a one-way street with me. I listen to people too. So if your listeners and your viewers wish to contribute, please do. I'm easy to find. I'm all over social media. Find me, reach out, tell me what you need from me.
Thank you so much, Leo. All the best.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, there was Leo Molloy, the Auckland mayoral candidate. As you heard from him in depth about his vision, what he thinks is wrong, what he will bring to the table. from seeking your votes in the Auckland mayoral candidate elections on 8th of March. It's pretty intensive things that he has talked about today, and some of the examples that he has used from the Finnish community housing projects to Sir Peter Blackland's report. And I think, he's a man on the right track. He's a man with a campaign, with a heart, wanting to make a difference. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Sunil Kaushal, and we look forward to joining with you again, coming to your screens, to your homes next Sunday. In the meantime, stay safe, be kind. Good evening.